You'll download the MSI installer from our website. You can use the default installation values, and this will then put Autopsy in a folder on your computer. It will put it in a version-specific folder, which allows you to have multiple versions of Autopsy installed at the same time. This is important that if you want to be able to open up past cases without modifying the case, you should open it up with the same version of Autopsy you were using last. Otherwise, a newer version of Autopsy may try and upgrade that data and change the case to meet the current requirements of Autopsy. If you don't want that to happen, keep an old version around and open it up with the old version again. If you want to run Autopsy on Linux and Mac, you can, but it requires more steps, and we don't focus as much on these platforms. We focus mainly on Windows. But to do this, there is a text file. It's called Running Linux OS X. The basic flow of it is to install some dependency programs using the package management tool based on that platform. You'll install things like Java, the sleuthkit, and photorec. You'll then download a zip file of Autopsy and expand it, and then run a script called Unix setup, and that will copy various files from those dependencies into Autopsy so you can then launch Autopsy and it will find everything it needs. In the last section, we talked about how you can run Autopsy optionally in a multi-user cluster environment to allow for collaboration and automated analysis. So to have that kind of environment set up, you'll have to install some other services. There's a lot of details in the Autopsy documentation. We're not going to replicate those here, but the basic concepts, at least for the level of this class, is that you'll need at least 2 dedicated servers as well as a central storage repository. You'll put Postgres and ActiveMQ on one server. Postgres is a database. ActiveMQ is a messaging system that allows the computers to communicate back and forth. You'll put Solr, the text index, on the other server. And the key point here is to make sure that all of the Autopsy clients can access the central storage at the same UNC or drive letter path. Everyone in the cluster needs to be able to access the data at the same location to make this whole process work. If you are going down the multi-user collaborative environment, after you have your services set up, you go to each of the clients, you go to the options panel, and you enable multi-user cases, and you fill in things like the database and the Solr index, hostname and username and passwords. And there should be a test button for each of those to make sure that they are working and you didn't make a mistake by entering in the wrong hostname or username. The central repository is a feature we talked about in the last section that allows you to make connections with past cases, as well as centrally manage hash sets and such things. If you want to configure Autopsy to use that, the first thing is to enable it. So you have to go to the options panel, choose central repository, and check the box to use the central repository. After that, you pick the database type. If you're doing a SQLite database, by default, it'll put a folder into your app data folder. That's okay, then hit go, and you're all set, but you can change it if you want to. If you use the Postgres database for a central repository, again, edit in host names, username, passwords, and hit OK, and those results will be saved. Other configuration you can do when you're doing an installation, we do support integrating in with Google and Microsoft for machine translation. We don't provide the API access. You have to have a key for that. The details for obtaining that are in our documentation. But if you are doing this, go to the options panel, go to the translations tab, pick your translation provider, enter in the credentials, and you can also change the language that you want to translate to if you want to translate to something other than English. There's other configuration that you need to do. Hash sets, keyword lists, other rules. We're going to deal with each of these as this course progresses, and we talk about general hash sets and keyword lists. The things in this section are all about general purpose things that are fairly easy. Again, we'll deal with more configuration a bit later on as the course progresses. Hi, I'm Brian Carrier from Basic Technology, and this is Section 3 of the Autopsy one-day training course, and we're going to talk now about cases and data sources. The basic goal of this section is to outline the ideas about how you organize the data in your case and how you add it to the case. We'll talk about creating cases, we'll talk about adding data sources to your case, and we'll talk about the types of supported data sources. So first, let's talk about a case. A case groups together the investigation data you're going to analyze. It's up to you how you actually organize these cases and how many you make. The most common way is to organize them by investigation, but some people will also organize them by host within investigation. It's up to you. The factors to keep in mind are that only one case can be opened at a time, and reporting is done at a case level. One kind of side note here, cases are automatically saved. Everything you do as part of your investigation and using Autopsy will automatically get saved, so there's no control S save feature. So how do you make a case? When you fire up Autopsy, you'll see our dog Renzik on the left-hand side there with three options, one of which is to make a case, or from the case menu when you have Autopsy open, there's also a new case feature. Once you do that, you'll get a wizard process. Step one is to specify the case name and the directory. You can optionally specify other case metadata, but this is entirely optional. If you have a case number, examiner name, etc., you can plug them in, but it's entirely optional. So each Autopsy case, both multi and single user cases, is going to have its own directory, and this is specified on that first wizard panel. Autopsy has a notion of a base directory, and the assumption here is that all of your cases will be stored in the same general area of your computer or your storage network. So for example, you may have a folder called C:\cases. If you make a case named bad stuff, it'll put that into that folder, and the resulting folder will be C:\cases\bad stuff. Okay, everything's going to go in there. The one note here, if you are in a multi-user cluster, all examiners need to have access to the case directory at the same path. So in this example, if you put a multi-user case on your C drive, you're probably going to have problems because everyone is going to have a different C drive, which is their local computer. In that case, you should either use a UNC path, like we have on the bottom here, a UNC server and share name, or use a drive letter that's been mapped to one of those, and that drive letter should be the same on all the computers. But if you're using a single user standalone setup, don't worry about it. Just make it wherever you have access to. Inside that case directory, there's a bunch of standard things, one of which is a database called autopsy.db, and this will only exist for standard single-user cases, and this is the SQLite database that will store basic case information and data source information. There's also an export folder, which is a default location to store exported files. There's a reports folder, which is a default place to store reports, and there's a module output folder, which is the default place that modules will write their output to. You can overrule all these things, and you can put export somewhere else and report somewhere else, but these are the default locations where you should go to look for things if you're looking around for some kind of data. Let's review data sources. Data sources are the data that you want to analyze using Autopsy. Autopsy will support disk images, local drives, local files, which are also called logical files, output from the Autopsy logical imager, and unallocated space files, which are basically data with no real structure that Autopsy knows how to analyze. It's just a raw chunk of bytes. To add a data source, you'll get brought into this after you make a case in the wizard, or you can also choose this from the menu as well. And you'll be given a list of types of what type of data source to add. And what happens when you do this? So it all depends on the data source. The goal of adding a data source to the case is to populate the case database with basic information about the data source and files inside the data source. So for example, when you add an E01 file, it'll save information about the size and name of the E01 file itself, and it'll go into the E01 and look at the file system, and it will add a row in the database for every file in that E01. So there's a basic scanning of the disk image and make some basic information. But the key idea here is that we're not actually analyzing the content. All we're doing is a basic scan of the data source, get some basic information to put inside that case database so we can later do our more in-depth analysis. So what's in the database? There's a bunch of stuff in there. There's a lot of tables, but here's some example high-level things that you care about. There's a table with all file metadata in it. So in this table, you'll find the file names, parent folders, file times, such as the modified times, the created times, the change times, file sizes, MD5 hash values, permissions, etc. Everything about a file, there's a table for it. You'll also find information here about partitions and volume systems, a whole bunch of things. Anything on a file, disk image, data structures is going to be in this database. The big thing to know, though, is that the database does not have copies of file content. It just has metadata. So this database will stay fairly small. It's just the structural information about the files in the